on a Saturday. So we've been very lucky to have Ernest Simon, a Holocaust survivor, who's kindly agreed to come and speak to you today. He comes courtesy of the Holocaust Educational Trust, and we are very grateful for this opportunity. So thank you very much. I know that this topic can be quite sensitive for some people, and I ask that you all treat it with the respect that it deserves. Thank you.
Sure. So good morning, and thank you for inviting me here. Tomorrow, as Gabby says, is Holocaust Memorial Day. Does anybody know why the date 27th of January was chosen? Yes?
I'm supposed to take a shot at that, saying that's when the first troops discovered the Holocaust.
Well, you're nearly there. Anybody else hazard a guess? Yes?
Is it the day the Holocaust started?
The Holocaust?
Started.
No. It's the day when it ended, actually, or near the end. Yeah. No, yes? No, it was the day that Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet troops. Yeah, so you're nearly right. Anyway, that's the reason why 27th of January was chosen. So I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about Holocaust Memorial Day. More than 1 million Jews were murdered in Auschwitz itself. This is in addition to the very many who were murdered elsewhere during the Holocaust period. It's also the day when we remember other genocides in Rwanda, in Cambodia, in Srebrenica, and in Darfur, and we mustn't forget those. Now, the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration is the power of words. And it's very appropriate that we are in a library today where words surround us, thousands and thousands of words surround us. I'd just like to say a few words about this very important theme. Words influence life incredibly. How miserable you can feel, for example, if you hear angry words from your friends or your parents. How happy you can feel if you're pleased by some sort of praise which you get from them. So I really want you to think very carefully about words, about how you use words, about the power of words. It's terribly important. Think about how words were used to incite hatred during the Holocaust and in subsequent genocides. And think about, for example, the power of the press today, not only in this country, but in all countries. How easily people are influenced by the press, and how important it is to think about what you're reading. Anne Frank, I'm sure that you've all heard of Anne Frank, wrote in her diary in April 1944, "I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift. When I write, I can shake off all my cares. My sorrows disappear. My spirits are revived." Here you see an example of how the power of words is used for good. But as we saw in the Holocaust, words are often used for evil. Go to the internet. I'm sure you all know how to do that. Go to the internet, put into your search engine the power of words and see what comes up. It's very interesting, and read about that carefully. Okay, and now that was just to introduce the subject, but I really want to carry on a little bit about the main theme that I want to talk about. I want you to try and imagine yourselves to be young Jews living in Germany in the 1930s. Hitler had come to power with his Nazi party in 1933, and by the middle of the 1930s, Jews were already under very severe repression. They were being tortured, they were being hounded, boys and girls could no longer go to school, businesses were being closed, unemployment was rife among Jewish men and women, and you were not allowed to visit cinemas or theaters. You were outcast and very badly treated. And many Jews at that time were already trying to leave Germany, trying to find other countries which would take them as immigrants. And they were finding it extremely difficult. Nobody was prepared to accept them. Very similar to the situation today with immigrants. And I want you to think about that, because there are some very important comparisons between what happened in the 1930s and what is happening today. So Roosevelt in the United States, the President of the United States, was coming under pressure from various pressure groups, mostly in the United States, to try to do something about it, to try to persuade other major countries of the world to accept immigrants from Germany, Jewish immigrants from Germany. So Roosevelt convened a conference at Évian-les-Bains. Évian-les-Bains is a small spa town on the south shore of Lake Geneva. It's in France. And he convened this conference. And the object of the conference, well, first of all, 32 countries took part, many private organizations, many voluntary organizations, and a vast number of journalists, as you can see. And the conference, the object of the conference was to find a home for Jewish refugees wanting to leave Germany, and later Austria also, because by March 1938, the annexation of Austria, the Anschluss, had already taken place. And by this time, there were an extra 200,000 Jews living in Austria who were also trying to get out, and many of them trying to get out. So the result of the conference, as you can see, was a disaster. It was a failure. People were simply not prepared to accept Jews. The delegates were saying things like, let me read some of the examples, what they were reading. I mean, major countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, and even Britain, they were not prepared to accept large numbers of Jewish refugees. The only country which was prepared to accept was the very small Dominican Republic, which was prepared to accept about 100,000, but only against payment of a large sum of money. But the Australian delegate said, for example, oh, thank you very much. Yeah. I'm just getting over a bit of a cough, so please excuse me if I cough now and again. As I was saying, the Australian delegate said, we don't have a real racial problem in our country, and we're not really keen to import one. The Frenchman said, we've reached saturation point for immigrants. The delegate from Peru said that his country had already been given a very good example by the United States administration. In other words, he was being very sarcastic. Central American states were not prepared to accept intellectuals or traders. And the one that I like, or that I like in inverted commas, Brazil said that every visa application had to be accompanied by a certificate of Christian baptism. So not very popular with Jews. So as you can see, the Évian conference was a disaster, it was a failure. And here we have an example, incidentally, of the power of words in a negative sense. And because this conference did not issue a statement condemning Nazis' activities, in other words, there was no issue of any sort of statement from the conference, so there was no words. And because of that, the Nazi observers at the conference were able to go back to Berlin and say to Hitler, you can do what you want with the Jews, nobody cares. And of course, there we have an example of the power of words in a negative sense, because a statement was not made that had a very disastrous effect. So let me now continue. Oh, no, there's just one other thing I want to show you, because there were some important people at that conference. Golda Meir, who is the future Prime Minister of Israel, she was at the conference as a young woman, and she said, there's only one thing I hope to see before I die, and that is that my people would not need expressions of sympathy anymore. And the future president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, he was also at this conference, and he said, the world is divided into two, where Jews are not allowed to enter and where Jews are not allowed to live. So, you see, this was really a disastrous event. But I'm going to talk to you about my own experiences, my own situation on the Kindertransport. Many of you study German. Oh, good. We've got some at the back. So you all know what Kindertransport means. I've written it down for you anyway, in case you didn't know. Children's transport. Okay? But I'm glad to see that there are people studying German, because now I've got to be careful what I say, because you can check me out if I'm wrong. Okay. I was born in Austria, in Vienna, not in Vienna, in a small town south of Vienna called Eisenstadt. Now, 79 years ago, on the 11th of January 1939, my parents did an amazingly brave thing. And my wife and I have often asked ourselves whether we would have been courageous enough to do what they did if we were under that sort of pressure. What they did at that time, and this was after the Anschluss in Austria, they put me on a train at midnight on the 11th of January when I was just 8 years old, and they put me on a train bound for England. And they had no idea at that time whether they would ever see me again. And that was, just think about it. Imagine that you yourselves are parents, and you've got a small child, and you know that you're being persecuted by the Nazis. You know that there's no future left for you in Austria or in Germany, as the case may be. And now what you do, you have an opportunity that your child can be saved through this Kindertransport system. Do you put your child on the train, or do you trust to luck and keep your child behind? Just think about how you might have reacted. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about my origins and what happened to me after that journey. So I was born in Eisenstadt. Eisenstadt is in the... Can you all see that? Am I blocking anybody's point of view here? Eisenstadt is in the green area, just the northern part, there. The northern part of the green area. The green area is Burgenland, the province of Burgenland. And it's the easternmost province of Austria, bordering Hungary, bordering Slovenia and Slovakia. And so Eisenstadt was really quite a small town, and Jews lived there, quite a number of Jews. This is a ghetto, the ghetto in which I was born in 1930. Now, anybody got any idea why the chain is there? Yes? I can't hear you. No, that's not the main reason, no? Yes?
Stop anyone from going in or going out.
You mean people?
Yeah.
No.
The inside and out.
No?
To stop cars.
Exactly, to stop cars, to stop vehicles. Now, why would anyone want to stop vehicles going through? Well, it's a religious reason. This is a Jewish ghetto, and this chain was put up on a Friday evening on the eve of the Sabbath. And it was taken down on the Saturday evening when the Sabbath was over. And the reason it was put up was that Jews could spend the Sabbath day in prayer and contemplation, as it should be, and in peace and quiet, not to be interrupted by the passing of vehicles through the place. So that's the reason for that. It's quite a well-known chain in Austrian history there. Now, this ghetto was really a self-imposed ghetto. It was not like some of the ghettos which had been created by the Nazis to make it easier for them to collect Jews together before extermination. This was a ghetto because it had existed for maybe 100 years before that. Jews simply wanted to live together in the company of other Jews so that they could live in a Jewish way without being interrupted. So I want to show you a few more photographs of that area. This is the chain on the pillar still exists. The other end of the ghetto, and this is really a plaque which has been put up in the meantime since the Holocaust days, and it simply says that this is where the synagogue of the community of Eisenstadt stood before it was destroyed on Kristallnacht, on the night of broken glass in November 1938. Have you all heard of Kristallnacht, night of broken glass? Yes? Good. So let me move on. This is a very interesting photo which I took a few years ago when I was on a visit there. It depicts a water jug and a water basin, and it indicates that a Levi lived in that building. Now, a Levi is a person in the Jewish religion who assists the priest, the Kohen, and during certain procedures in certain religious services in the synagogue, the priest, the Kohen, is required to bless the congregation. And before this blessing, he needs to wash his hands. And it is the Levi's job to help the priest with the hand-washing process. So that's really why that basin and jug are there, simply to typify the fact that a Levi lived in that house. This must have been there for well over 100 years, and I was very surprised that it's still there, despite the Nazi occupation. Yes, this is a small synagogue, a small private synagogue, privately owned by a rich industrialist called Schandor Wolf, who was a wine merchant in Eisenstadt. And the reason that that was not destroyed by the Nazis is that it's very small, and it was well back from the main street, in among other houses, and it could well be that the Nazis were afraid that by destroying that, they might be destroying the other houses nearby at the same time. Today, it is part of the the Jewish Museum of Austria, which has a branch in Eisenstadt. It's a very lovely little synagogue, and it really is very interesting to visit it. For the German students among you, you might have difficulty reading that old-style Gothic script. It simply says Geburtsmatrikelauszug, which means birth certificate. And it's my birth certificate, and it indicates, first of all, that my name there was not Ernest, which it is today, but Ernst, the name with which I was given at birth. It became Ernest when I came to England. It indicates also that I'm masculine, And interesting, the ISR indicates that I am Israelitish, Jewish. Now that's something that you wouldn't find on a birth certificate in this country, where your religion is not indicated. It also gives the names of my parents and their occupations. Yeah, that's an interesting photograph. About 10 years ago, I was on a visit to Israel, and I have a friend there, a man called Menachem Breuer, who was, for many years, the leader of the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. And the reason why Menachem is a friend, among other things, is that he is also from Eisenstadt. And his parents and my parents were friends. And we met each other. We were at dinner together, and Menachem said, "My sister Zhuzi would like to meet you." And so I said, "Fine, let's meet Zhuzi." Anyway, she came along, and Zhuzi brought this photograph. So the lady, the little girl there is Zhuzi, and that's me on the left. So we met when we were in our 70s, Zhuzi and I, and this is taken when we were probably about 4 or 5 years old. Interesting that she had that photograph. And she, in fact, that other one is there too. That's me on the left and the Zhuzi on the right. And this is my first school report, after my first year at school, from which you can see, even those that don't understand German, they can see that I was absolutely brilliant at that age. Sehr gut for everything, which means very good. Except handwriting, which was just gut, just good, not sehr gut. That's me on my first day at school, typical Austrian school wear, and another one of me at that sort of age, wearing Austrian lederhosen, leather shorts, which is quite typical for Austrian schoolboys and also Bavarian schoolboys in southern Germany. So let me move on. Yes, let me move on a little bit. Eisenstadt is the capital of the province of Burgenland. It's about 40 kilometers south of Vienna, and it's the home, or it was the home for many years, of the very famous Esterházy family, a noble family of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's a family which actually helped Eisenstadt to prosper. Among other things, they encouraged Jews to come to Eisenstadt and to some of the other small towns nearby, which were also under their protection. They accepted Jews as refugees at a time when they were being persecuted in Vienna and driven out of Vienna, and Jews were welcomed in Eisenstadt. They had to pay a sort of tax of protection, a tax of tolerance, but nevertheless they paid that, and the result was that the town benefited, a rich Jewish culture developed there. Prince Nicolaus Esterházy, at that time, he was also the patron of Joseph Haydn. Oh, by the way, that you see there, that is Schloss Esterházy, the Esterházy Palace, which today is used by the Council of Eisenstadt for various offices. But the beautiful thing about that building is that inside there is the most fantastic concert hall. Very, very beautiful. We were lucky enough a few years ago to be in Eisenstadt during the fortnight's Haydn Festival, and we were able to get a seat there for one of the concerts. Joseph Haydn, as I say, that's Joseph Haydn. He worked in Eisenstadt, lived in Eisenstadt for nearly 30 years, working for the Esterházy family. And that's the church where Haydn in fact is buried. So, there are one or two more. That's my father's birth certificate. When my father was born in 1901, Eisenstadt, in fact, was not part of Austria. Burgenland itself, the province of Burgenland, was part of Hungary, and Eisenstadt was called Kismarton, the Hungarian name, and not Eisenstadt. But it became Eisenstadt. It became Austrian in 1921 at the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. I'm showing you these two passport photos. They are the passport photos of my aunt and uncle who also lived in Eisenstadt. And the reason I'm showing you that is so that you can see the letter J. Letter J for Jude, or Jew, which is stamped on, or was stamped on the passports of all Jews at that time. The object being that if any of them were to obtain illegal entry, for example, to a country like Switzerland, the neighboring country, and if they were picked up by the Swiss authorities, who then saw the letter J on it, they would be automatically returned to Austria. So it made life extremely difficult for Austrian or German Jews, in fact, to try and get out of the country illegally without any sort of official visa. This is the cemetery of the Jewish cemetery of Eisenstadt, where my grandparents and my great-grandparents are buried. And it's still there today, and it is cared for by the staff of the Jewish Museum there. Yeah, I'll come back to that in a moment. So, I mean, the history of the Jews in Eisenstadt goes back several hundred years. It's well known as a place of Jewish learning, and Jews were in fact an integral part of the community. And I can trace my own family history back to about 1800 on my father's side. My mother, on the other hand, she was born some 60 kilometers east of Eisenstadt in what is today Hungary, near a town called Sopron. They lived in a small village. Her father was the village shoemaker, and my mother was one of 12 siblings. So she had 11 brothers and sisters. She went to work in Austria as a young woman. She met my father there. They married in 1928, and they settled in Eisenstadt. There was no language problem because they both spoke German and Hungarian. By the middle of the 19th century, there were some 4,000 Jews living in Vienna, which was only about 1% of the population. By about 1900, this grew to something like 150,000, about 9% of the population. And 20 years later, in 1923, this had grown to about 200,000. I mean, the social situation of the Jews in Vienna gradually improved, and by the 1930s, Jews were among the leaders of the intellectual, commercial, and social life of Vienna. But by this time, by the middle of the 1930s, there was a very strong undercurrent of anti-Semitism which had grown up. And it's not surprising that when the German Anschluss of March 1938 came, that this was treated with pleasure by a very large number of Austrians. The word Anschluss, by the way, means a joining together, an annexation. It does not mean an invasion. So the Nazis never actually invaded Austria as such. Now suddenly, after March 1930, suddenly everything changed.